The library was empty, except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of rain tapping against tall windows. It was 7:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, and most people had already gone home to their families, their dinners, their evening routines. But I was still there, sitting at the same corner table I'd claimed 3 months ago when I first started offering tutoring services to make ends meet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Marcus, and at 34, I never imagined I'd be teaching basic computer skills to adults in a public library. But life has a way of humbling you when you least expect it. 6 months earlier, I'd been laid off from my programming job at a tech startup that folded overnight. The savings I thought would last 6 months were gone in 3, and pride doesn't pay rent. That's when I saw the flyer on the library bulletin board. Adult Learning Program seeks volunteer tutors. The pay was modest, barely enough to keep my small apartment, but it was something. And honestly, after months of rejection emails and automated responses, I needed to feel useful again. Most of my students were predictable. Recent immigrants working toward their GED, young mothers trying to finish high school online, older folks who'd never learned to use email. They came with specific goals, clear timelines, and realistic expectations. Then Rebecca walked in. Rebecca Martinez arrived 15 minutes late to our first session, and I almost didn't recognize her as a student. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer, carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to boardrooms rather than classrooms. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional chignon, and when she extended her hand for a handshake, her grip was firm, decisive. "Mr. Thompson? I'm Rebecca Martinez. I apologize for being late. Traffic was heavier than expected coming from downtown." I stood up momentarily, thrown off balance. Most of my students shuffled in nervously, clutching worn notebooks and looking around uncertainly. Rebecca commanded the space immediately, as if she'd been attending library study sessions her entire life. "Please, call me Marcus, and no problem about the time. Shall we get started?" She settled into the chair across from me with practiced efficiency, placing her briefcase beside her and withdrawing a brand new laptop still in its packaging, along with a yellow legal pad covered in neat handwriting. "I should explain my situation," she began, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent I couldn't quite identify. "I'm the regional director for Hartford Insurance. I've been with the company for 18 years, working my way up from claims adjuster to my current position. But the industry is changing rapidly, and I find myself behind." She paused, looking down at her hands. For just a moment, the confident executive facade flickered, revealing something more vulnerable underneath. "The company is transitioning to a completely digital platform. Cloud computing, data analytics, automated systems I don't understand. They've offered training programs, but they're designed for younger employees who grew up with this technology. I need something more personal." I nodded, understanding beginning to dawn. "What's your current comfort level with computers?" Rebecca's laugh was short, almost bitter. "I can send emails and use basic word processing. I know how to open a web browser and navigate simple websites. Beyond that. She gestured helplessly. "I feel like I'm trying to learn a foreign language where everyone else is already fluent." There was something in her tone that went deeper than professional frustration. I'd heard it before, in students who came to me not just seeking knowledge, but fighting against time itself, against the feeling that the world had moved on without them. "What made you decide to seek private tutoring instead of the company programs?" Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, staring at the laptop box as if it contained either salvation or condemnation. 2 weeks ago, we had a department meeting about the new systems. The IT director, who's probably younger than my daughter, was explaining the migration process. Everyone else was nodding along, asking technical questions, discussing implementation timelines. And I just sat there, understanding. Maybe every third word. She looked up at me, and I saw something I hadn't expected in those dark brown eyes. Fear. Not the simple anxiety of learning something new, but the deeper terror of becoming irrelevant. After the meeting, my assistant, she's 26, and handles technology like I handle morning coffee, she asked if I needed help with anything. Way she said it, so carefully, so diplomatically ... I realized she'd been covering for me. Probably for months. Translating technical emails, simplifying reports, making sure I didn't embarrass myself in meetings where everyone else spoke this digital language I'd never learned. Rebecca's hands moved restlessly on the table, her wedding ring catching the fluorescent light. I built my career on being competent, Marcus, on being the person others came to for answers. I mentored dozens of employees, navigated company politics, closed deals worth millions of dollars. But put me in front of a spreadsheet with macros or ask me to analyze data visualizations, and I'm completely lost. The vulnerability in her admission was striking. Here was a woman who clearly commanded respect in her professional life, admitting to a complete stranger that she felt inadequate. It took courage, and I found myself respecting her decision to seek help rather than fake competency until someone called her bluff. What specific areas do you want to focus on? I asked, pulling out my own notebook. Everything, she said immediately, then caught herself. I'm sorry. I know that's not helpful. Let me think. She consulted her legal pad. The new system requires proficiency in Excel, not just basic spreadsheets, but pivot tables, formulas, data analysis. They want us to use something called Tableau for creating reports. We're moving to cloud-based document management, and I need to understand how to collaborate on files in real time with team members. She continued down her list, and I realized the scope of what she was asking for. This wasn't a few weeks of basic computer literacy. This was essentially learning an entirely new skill set that most people acquired gradually over years of professional development. Rebecca, I said gently, this is a substantial amount of material. Most of my students come in wanting to learn one specific program or skill. What you're describing is more like a complete digital transformation. Her expression tightened. Is it too much? Are you saying it's not possible? There was something almost desperate in the question, as if my answer would determine more than just her tutoring schedule. I sensed this wasn't really about spreadsheets and cloud storage. There was a larger story here, something that made this technological competency feel like a matter of survival rather than simple professional development. It's not impossible, I said carefully, but it will require significant time and commitment. How urgently do you need these skills? The full system rollout is in 6 months. By then, I need to be proficient enough that I'm not constantly asking for help or slowing down my team. She paused. Honestly, I need to be good enough that no one questions whether I belong in my position. That last sentence hung in the air. Between us, loaded with implications. I'd worked in corporate environments long enough to understand the pressures she was facing. Technology had become the great divider, separating those who could adapt from those who couldn't. And in a youth-obsessed industry, being on the wrong side of that divide could be career suicide. Can you commit to 3 sessions per week? I asked. 2 hours each session? Yes, absolutely. And you'll need to practice between sessions. This isn't like traditional classroom learning where you can memorize information for a test. You need to develop muscle memory, intuitive understanding of how these systems work. I understand. I'm prepared to dedicate whatever time is necessary. Her determination was evident, but I sensed something else beneath it. A kind of quiet desperation that suggested the stakes were higher than she was letting on. Rebecca, can I ask you something personal? She nodded, though her posture became slightly more guarded. What happens if you don't master these skills in time? For a moment, her professional composure cracked completely. She looked away toward the rain-streaked windows, and I saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. "They won't fire me outright," she said finally. "The company isn't like that. They'll probably offer me a lateral position with reduced responsibilities. Maybe move me to a smaller regional office. Or suggest I consider early retirement with a modest severance package." The words came out flat, emotionless, but I could hear the devastation underneath. "I've spent 18 years building my career, Marcus. I have a mortgage, a daughter in college, elderly parents who depend on me for support. I can't afford to step backward now, not financially and not personally." There it was. The real reason she was sitting in a library at 7:30 p.m. asking a stranger to teach her skills that colleagues half her age took for granted. This wasn't about professional advancement. This was about professional survival. "What does your family think about this situation?" Rebecca's laugh was sharp, brittle. "My husband thinks I'm overreacting. He keeps saying the company values experience over technical skills, that they won't really replace me over something like computer proficiency. He doesn't understand that the business world has changed. Experience only matters if you can apply it using current tools." She fidgeted with her wedding ring again, a gesture I was beginning to recognize as a nervous habit. "My daughter is supportive. She doesn't really understand why this is so difficult for me. She grew up with technology. For her, learning a new program is like learning a new song. For me, it feels like learning to speak Mandarin while riding a bicycle." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, asterisk. The analogy made me smile despite the seriousness of her situation. That's actually not a bad comparison. Learning technology as an adult is like learning a language. It requires patience, practice, and accepting that you'll make mistakes. "I don't like making mistakes," Rebecca admitted. "In my current role, I'm expected to have answers, to be confident in my decisions. The idea of stumbling through basic tasks that my subordinates could do in their sleep. It's humbling in the worst possible way." I understood her reluctance. Pride was often the biggest obstacle for adult learners, especially those accustomed to being experts in their field. The vulnerability of not knowing something, of asking for help, of potentially looking foolish in front of others, it was often harder to overcome than the actual technical challenges. "We're going to start with the assumption that making mistakes is part of the process," I said. "In fact, I want you to promise me you'll make mistakes, because that's how you'll learn what doesn't work and why." Rebecca looked skeptical. "That's easy for you to say. You're not the one whose career depends on appearing competent." "Actually, I am," I replied. 6 months ago, I was a software developer who thought I knew everything about technology. Then the industry shifted, my skills became outdated, and I found myself unemployed and struggling to understand new frameworks that seemed to emerge overnight. I'm sitting here tutoring because I had to admit I needed to learn new things too." The admission seemed to surprise her. "You lost your job because of technology changes?" "The startup I worked for was using older programming languages. We thought we had time to modernize, but funding dried up and the company folded. When I started job hunting, I discovered that my 5 years of experience meant nothing if it wasn't with the latest tools and methodologies." Rebecca leaned back in her chair, studying me with new interest. "How did you handle it? The feeling of being obsolete?" "Badly at first," I admitted. "I spent a lot of time being angry at the industry, at younger programmers who seemed to learn new languages like they were changing clothes. I felt like the rules had changed without anyone telling me. And then I realized I had a choice. I could spend my energy being bitter about how unfair it was, or I could spend it learning what I needed to know to stay relevant. It wasn't easy, and there were definitely moments when I wanted to give up. But here's what I discovered: the ability to learn, to adapt, to acknowledge when you don't know something. That's actually a strength, not a weakness. Rebecca was quiet for several minutes, processing what I'd said. Outside, the rain had intensified, creating a rhythmic backdrop to our conversation. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Of course. Do you really think I can do this?" "Not the polite answer you give all your students, but your honest assessment." I looked at her, really looked at her. The way she'd prepared for our session with detailed notes and specific goals. The way she'd researched my background before coming. The determination in her voice when she talked about her timeline. The vulnerability she'd shown in admitting her fears. "Yes," I said. "But not because you're naturally gifted with technology or because the material isn't challenging. I think you can do this because you're approaching it with the same methodical, professional mindset you've used to build your career. And because you're willing to be uncomfortable in service of a larger goal." She nodded slowly. "When do we start?" I smiled and gestured toward the laptop box. "Right now if you're ready. Let's begin with the basics and work our way up." Rebecca reached for the box, then paused. "Marcus, thank you for being honest with me. About your situation, about what this will require. I've been to other tutors who tried to convince me this would be easy, that I'd pick it up quickly. I knew they were lying, and it made me feel even worse about my chances." "Learning something completely new is never easy," I replied. "But that doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means we need to be patient with the process and with ourselves." As Rebecca began unpacking her laptop, carefully removing each component, and reading the instruction manual with the same attention she probably gave insurance contracts, I realized this wasn't going to be like my other tutoring relationships. There was an intensity here, a stakes level that went beyond simple education. She wasn't just learning to use a computer. She was fighting to remain relevant in a world that seemed determined to leave her behind. And somehow, in agreeing to help her, I'd become invested in that fight too. That first session lasted until the library closed at 9. We'd barely scratched the surface of what Rebecca needed to learn, but something important had happened in those 90 minutes. She'd stopped apologizing for asking questions, and I'd watched her natural problem-solving instincts begin to emerge from beneath her technological anxiety. We'd worked through the basics, setting up her laptop, understanding file systems, creating folders with logical naming conventions. Simple tasks that most people learn unconsciously, but for Rebecca, each click required deliberate thought and conscious decision-making. What impressed me wasn't her speed. She was methodical to the point of being slow, but her persistence. When a dialog box appeared asking her to choose between 3 options, she didn't panic or immediately ask for help. She read each option carefully, considered the consequences, and made informed decisions. "Same time Thursday?" I asked as we packed up our materials. "Actually," Rebecca said, hesitating slightly, "would it be possible to meet Friday instead? I have a budget review meeting Thursday evening that I can't reschedule." "Of course, Friday works for me." She gathered her things with the same efficiency she'd shown arriving, but there was something different about her posture now. Less rigid, perhaps. The severe business facade had softened slightly during our session, revealing glimpses of the person beneath the professional armor. "Marcus," she said as we reached the library entrance, "is it normal to feel exhausted after a tutoring session?" "I feel like I just ran a marathon," I laughed. "Completely normal. Learning new skills as an adult requires intense mental focus. Your brain is literally forming new neural pathways. It's like going to the gym for the first time in years. Everything feels harder than it should." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "That's oddly reassuring. I was worried I was just too old for this." "Age has nothing to do with it. I've taught 19-year-olds who struggled with concepts you grasped immediately, and I've taught 70-year-olds who picked up programming faster than college graduates. She seemed to consider this as we walked toward the parking garage. What's the difference between the ones who struggle and the ones who succeed? It was a perceptive question, one that got to the heart of adult education. Honestly, it's usually about why they're learning. Students who are here because someone told them they should be here tend to struggle. Students who have a clear, personal reason for mastering the material, they find ways to push through the frustration. And which category do I fall into? I studied her face in the dim parking garage lighting. Definitely the second. You're not here because learning technology might be nice to have. You're here because not learning, it isn't an option. Rebecca smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Sometimes I wonder if that makes it harder. When the stakes are so high, every mistake feels catastrophic. We'd reached her car, a silver BMW that looked like it belonged in an executive parking spot rather than a public library garage. She unlocked it but didn't immediately get in. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "How do you handle failure? I mean, real failure, not just making mistakes while learning." The question caught me off guard with its directness. Most of my students kept our conversations focused on the technical material. Rebecca seemed determined to understand not just the how of learning, but the psychology behind it. "I'm probably not the best person to ask," I admitted. 6 months ago, I would have told you that failure was something that happened to other people. I'd been successful at everything I'd tried: school, career, relationships. Then everything fell apart at once, and I discovered I had no idea how to handle it. What changed? I leaned against the concrete pillar next to her car, surprised by my willingness to share personal details with someone I'd just met. There was something about Rebecca's directness that invited honesty. I spent about 3 months feeling sorry for myself, sending out resumes with increasingly desperate cover letters, watching my savings disappear, convincing myself that the problem was with the industry, not with me. Then my rent came due, and I didn't have enough to cover it. Rebecca winced. That must have been terrifying. It was. But it was also clarifying. I could either find a way to pay my bills or lose my apartment. Self-pity wasn't going to solve either problem. That's when I started tutoring, started learning new programming languages, started accepting that my old approach wasn't working. Do you think you're better off now than before everything fell apart? It was a question I'd been avoiding asking myself. The honest answer was complicated. "I'm definitely humbler," I said finally, "and probably more resilient. I know now that success isn't permanent and failure isn't fatal. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss the confidence I used to have. The feeling that I knew what I was doing." Rebecca nodded slowly. "I understand that. I've spent so much of my career being the expert, the person others came to for answers. Now I feel like I'm starting over, except I'm doing it at an age when starting over feels impossible. What would happen if you gave yourself permission to not be the expert for a while?" She looked at me sharply. "What do you mean?" "You're trying to learn these skills while maintaining the image of someone who already knows them. That's like trying to learn to swim while pretending you're not getting wet. What if you just accepted that for the next few months, you're going to be a beginner?" Rebecca was quiet for several minutes, staring at her car keys. "I've never been a beginner at anything professional. I started at the insurance company right out of college. Everything I learned while already having a job, already having some level of expertise to build on. And now I feel like I'm 22 again, except with a mortgage and responsibilities and people watching to see if I can handle the pressure." There was something vulnerable in her admission that made me want to offer comfort, but I sensed that wasn't what she needed. Rebecca struck me as someone who'd been handling pressure her entire adult life. What she needed was permission to acknowledge that this particular pressure was different. "The people watching," I said carefully, Are they actually judging your learning curve, or are you assuming they are? Rebecca considered this. Both, probably. Some of my colleagues definitely see this technological transition as an opportunity to reposition themselves. Younger managers who want to prove they're more valuable than the old guard. And your boss? David's been with the company longer than I have. He's facing the same challenges, but he's always been more naturally comfortable with technology. And he's got 5 years until retirement, so the stakes aren't quite the same. I could hear the frustration in her voice, the sense of being caught in a generational shift that wasn't entirely fair, but was entirely real. Rebecca, can I make a suggestion, please? For our next few sessions, I want you to focus only on learning. Not on how quickly you're learning, not on how your progress compares to anyone else's, not on what this means for your career. Just understanding the material. She looked skeptical. How am I supposed to ignore the career implications? That's the whole reason I'm here. Because right now, the pressure is interfering with your ability to learn. You're so focused on the stakes that you're not allowing yourself to make the mistakes that lead to real understanding. Rebecca leaned against her car, arms crossed, considering my words. You want me to pretend this doesn't matter. I want you to trust that if you focus on learning well, the career benefits will follow. But if you focus primarily on the career benefits, you might not learn well enough for them to matter. It was a subtle distinction, but an important one. I'd seen too many adult students sabotage their own progress by being so afraid of failure that they never risk the confusion that leads to breakthrough moments. That sounds terrifying, Rebecca admitted. Learning usually is. That's how you know you're doing it right. She smiled at that, the first genuinely relaxed expression I'd seen from her all evening. You know, my daughter would love that philosophy. She's always telling me I'm too risk-averse. What does she study? Computer science, actually. Junior year at Northwestern. The irony isn't lost on me that my 19-year-old daughter knows more about technology than I do. Have you considered asking her for help? Rebecca's expression tightened slightly. I've thought about it, but there's something demoralizing about admitting to your child that you don't understand things they take for granted. I've always been the one with answers. I taught her to drive, helped her with homework, gave her advice about relationships and careers. The idea of reversing those roles feels like admitting I'm getting old. I understood the reluctance. There was something particularly difficult about acknowledging ignorance to people who looked up to you, especially family members. What if it wasn't about reversing roles? What if it was about showing her that learning never stops? Rebecca considered. This, you think she'd see it as a positive thing? I think most kids are proud when their parents show curiosity and willingness to grow. My father spent years refusing to use email because he thought it was too complicated. When he finally learned, my sister and I weren't disappointed in him for not knowing sooner. We were impressed that he'd tackled something that intimidated him. Maybe, Rebecca said, but she still sounded uncertain. I'll think about it. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the rain pattering against the concrete ceiling above us. The parking garage felt oddly intimate, like a private space carved out of the public world. Marcus, Rebecca said finally, thank you for tonight. Not just for the technical instruction, but for the other conversation. I didn't realize how much I needed to talk through some of this. I enjoyed it too. Most of my tutoring sessions are pretty straightforward. Someone wants to learn Excel formulas or how to use email. This feels different. Different how? I thought about how to articulate it. More collaborative, I suppose. Like we're both figuring things out together rather than me just transferring information to you. Rebecca nodded. I like that. I've been to training sessions where the instructor clearly thought I was too slow, too old, too set in my ways to really learn. It's refreshing to work with someone who doesn't seem to have already decided what I'm capable of. I don't think age determines. Learning capacity. Approach does. And you have a very systematic approach. Is that good or bad for technology learning? It's good. Technology rewards logical thinking and careful attention to detail. Your business background is actually an advantage. You understand systems and processes, which is more than half. The battle. Rebecca looked genuinely surprised. Really? I've been thinking of my lack of technical experience as a huge disadvantage. It can be, if you let it intimidate you. But it can also be an asset. You're not bringing bad habits or outdated assumptions to the material. You're approaching everything fresh, which means you'll learn current best practices from the beginning. She seemed to be processing this reframe, considering how to apply it to her own self-perception. I should get going, she said finally. Traffic back to Westport gets brutal after 9:30. See you Friday, same time? Actually, would 7 work for you? I have a conference call with our Seattle office that might run late. 7's perfect. As she got into her car, Rebecca rolled down the window. Marcus, what should I practice? Between now and then, just spend time with the laptop. Open programs, explore menus, click on things to see what happens. Don't worry about accomplishing specific tasks. Just get comfortable with the interface. And if I break something, I laughed. You won't break anything important. And if you do, that's what our next session is for. Rebecca smiled and pulled out of the parking space. I watched her taillights disappear around the corner, then walked to my own car, a 10-year-old Honda, that looked distinctly humble next to the BMWs and Audis in the executive section of the garage. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Hartford, I found myself thinking about Rebecca's question. Was I better off than before everything fell apart? The honest answer was that I wasn't sure yet. But I was beginning to suspect that helping Rebecca navigate her own transformation might be part of figuring out my own. There was something energizing about working with a student who brought such clear motivation and intellectual curiosity to the learning process. Most of my other students were pleasant enough, but they approached tutoring as a necessary chore. Rebecca approached it like a puzzle she was determined to solve. I pulled into my apartment complex and sat in the car for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled down. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Thank you again for tonight. Looking forward to Friday. Rebecca, I typed back. See you then. Remember, make mistakes fearlessly. Her response came immediately. I'll practice that too. I laughed and headed upstairs to my small apartment, already thinking about how to structure our next session. We'd covered the absolute basics tonight, but there was so much more ground to cover. Excel, data analysis, cloud computing, each area would require weeks of focused practice. But for the first time since I'd started tutoring, I was genuinely excited about a student's progress. Rebecca had the drive and intelligence to master these skills. What she needed was confidence and permission to be imperfect while she learned. Spent the next hour researching teaching methodologies for adult learners, looking for strategies that might help Rebecca overcome her fear of making mistakes. Everything I read reinforced what I'd observed tonight. Adult students learned best when they felt safe to experiment and fail. The challenge would be creating that sense of safety. For someone whose professional reputation felt tied to always having the right answers. But if tonight's conversation was any indication, Rebecca was already beginning to question some of her own assumptions about learning and competence. As I got ready for bed, I realized I was looking forward to Friday's session with an anticipation I hadn't felt about work in months. There was something deeply satisfying about helping someone unlock their own potential, especially someone as committed as Rebecca. I had no idea yet where this tutoring relationship would lead, but I sensed it would be different from anything I'd experienced before. Rebecca wasn't just learning technology skills. She was learning to be vulnerable, to ask for help, to trust in her own ability to grow and change, and somehow, In teaching her those lessons, I was beginning to learn them myself. Friday arrived with an early autumn chill that made the library feel more welcoming than usual. I arrived at 6:30 to set up our workspace, arranging 2 chairs at our usual table and testing the Wi-Fi connection. Rebecca had mentioned wanting to practice cloud-based applications, which meant we'd need reliable internet access. At exactly 7 o'clock, I heard the familiar click of heels on the library's marble floor. But when I looked up, I barely recognized the woman approaching our table. Gone was the severe business suit and pulled-back hair. Instead, Rebecca wore dark jeans, a soft cream sweater, and her hair fell loose around her shoulders. She looked younger, more relaxed, though there was still tension around her eyes. "I hope casual dress is acceptable for tonight's session," she said, settling into her chair. I came straight from my daughter's apartment. "Of course. How was your visit?" Rebecca's expression brightened in a way I hadn't seen before. "Wonderful, actually. And educational." Sarah insisted on showing me her latest programming project, something about data visualization for environmental research. I understood maybe 10% of what she explained, but watching her work ... double quotes, she paused, searching for words. She has this confidence with technology that I envy. She approaches problems like puzzles to be solved rather than obstacles to be feared. Sounds like she inherited your problem-solving instincts. Maybe, but she also has something I've lost somewhere along the way, the willingness to experiment without knowing the outcome in advance. Rebecca pulled out her laptop, which now showed signs of use, a few small scratches, some wear around the edges. I told her about our tutoring sessions. How did she react? Better than I expected. She didn't seem shocked that I needed help, and she didn't offer to take over my learning, which I was worried about. Instead, she asked what specific areas I was struggling with and suggested some online resources that might supplement our sessions. Rebecca handed me a piece of paper covered with Sarah's handwriting, website URLs, YouTube channel recommendations, practice exercise suggestions. The list was thoughtful and well organized, clearly created by someone who understood both technology and her mother's learning style. She also said something that stuck with me, Rebecca continued. She said that in computer science, being wrong is just the first step toward being right. That the most important skill isn't knowing all the answers, it's knowing how to find them and not being afraid to test your hypotheses. That's excellent advice. Did you take it? Rebecca smiled sheepishly. I tried. Wednesday night, I spent 2 hours just exploring different menus and settings. I changed the desktop background, rearranged icons, installed a few programs Sarah recommended. I even accidentally deleted something important and had to figure out how to restore it from the recycle bin. And how did that feel? Terrifying. At first, then oddly empowering. I realized that most mistakes aren't permanent. There are usually ways to undo things, to fix problems, to start over if necessary. This was exactly the kind of breakthrough I'd been hoping for. Rebecca was beginning to develop the experimental mindset that made technology learning possible. But more than that, she was starting to trust her own ability to recover from mistakes. What should we focus on tonight? I asked, opening my notebook. Excel formulas. I've been practicing basic spreadsheet functions, but I need to understand how to create complex formulas that will analyze data automatically. She opened her laptop and navigated to a spreadsheet she'd apparently been working on. I brought a sample of the kind of report I'll need to generate once the new system is implemented. I leaned over to look at her screen and was impressed by what I saw. The spreadsheet contained 3 months of insurance claims data, hundreds of rows with columns for claim numbers, dollar amounts, claim types, resolution dates, and adjuster assignments. She'd organized the information logically and had even attempted some basic calculations. "This is excellent work," I said. "You've already accomplished the hardest part. organizing complex data in a logical structure. Thank you, but I'm stuck. On the analysis portion, I need to create formulas that will automatically calculate things like average claim value by type, processing time trends, and adjuster performance metrics. Right now, I'm doing all of this manually, which takes hours and leaves room for calculation errors. I could see why this skill felt crucial to her job security. The kind of analysis she was describing was exactly what separated modern insurance professionals from those who could be replaced by automated systems. Let's start with average calculations and work our way up to more complex functions, I suggested. For the next hour, we worked through increasingly sophisticated Excel formulas. Rebecca approached each new concept with methodical concentration, taking detailed notes and asking clarifying questions. But I noticed something different about her learning style tonight. She was more willing to try things before asking for confirmation, more comfortable with the trial and error process that effective learning required. "Marcus," she said during a break between exercises, "can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. How do you handle feeling stupid?" "I mean, when you're learning something new and you feel like everyone else grasps it faster than you do." The question was raw and honest, the kind that revealed someone's deepest insecurities. "I think everyone feels that way when they're truly challenging themselves," I replied. "The problem is that we usually only see other people's finished products, not their learning process. Your daughter looks confident with programming now, but I guarantee she spent countless hours feeling confused and frustrated when she was starting out." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "That's what she said too. She told me about a project last semester where she spent 3 weeks debugging a single piece of code. She said there were nights when she questioned whether she was smart enough for computer science, and what got her through it? Stubbornness mostly. And the realization that struggling with difficult material didn't mean she wasn't capable. It meant the material was actually challenging enough to teach her something new." Rebecca had clearly internalized this lesson from her daughter, but I could see she was still working to apply it to her own learning experience. "What would happen if you gave yourself permission to struggle?" I asked. "What do you mean?" "Right now, you're fighting 2 battles simultaneously. You're trying to learn complex technical skills, and you're also trying to maintain the appearance that learning these skills isn't difficult for you. What if you dropped the second battle and focused all your energy on the first one?" Rebecca was quiet for several minutes, staring at her laptop screen where a half-completed formula waited for her attention. "I've spent my entire career projecting competence," she said finally. "Even when I didn't know something, I learned it quickly enough that no one noticed the gap. This feels different. The learning curve is steeper, and the stakes feel higher." "What specifically worries you about people noticing your learning?" "That they'll decide I'm not worth the investment. That it's easier to hire someone who already has these skills than to wait for me to develop them." It was a legitimate fear, but I suspected it was also paralyzing her learning process. "Rebecca, in your 18 years at the insurance company, how many times have you learned completely new skills?" She considered this constantly. New regulations, new software systems, new management methodologies. "I've probably mastered dozens of new competencies." "And how long did those typically take to learn?" It varied. Some things I picked up in weeks, others took months of practice before I felt truly proficient. "Did anyone question your competence during those learning periods?" "No, but those were different. They were incremental improvements to skills I already had, not fundamental changes to how I do my job." I could see the distinction she was making, but I wondered if it was as significant as she believed. What if this technological transition is just another skill development cycle, albeit a larger one? Rebecca looked at me with surprise. "You think I'm overestimating how different this is. I think you're underestimating how much of what you already know will transfer to these new tools. You understand data analysis, you just need to learn new methods for performing it." You understand business processes. You just need to learn how technology can streamline them. But what if I'm too slow? What if younger colleagues master these tools faster than I do? Then you'll bring something to the table that they can't. 18 years of business experience and institutional knowledge. The question isn't whether you'll learn as quickly as someone half your age. The question is whether you'll learn thoroughly enough to apply these tools more effectively than someone who understands the technology but not the business. This seemed to resonate with Rebecca. Her posture relaxed slightly, and she turned her attention back to the Excel formulas with renewed focus. We spent the remainder of the session working through complex data analysis functions. Rebecca's progress was steady and impressive. More importantly, she began to develop the kind of intuitive understanding that would allow her to create her own formulas rather than just following instructions. "I want to try something," she said near the end of our session. "Instead of calculating adjuster performance manually, I want to create a formula that will do it automatically and update whenever new data is added." It was an ambitious goal that would require combining several advanced Excel functions. I watched as Rebecca worked through the logic, breaking down the problem into smaller components and building the solutions step by step. When she encountered obstacles, she didn't immediately ask for help. Instead, she tried different approaches, consulted her notes, and experimented with variations. After 20 minutes of focused work, she succeeded in creating a dynamic formula that calculated complex performance metrics automatically. When the results appeared on her screen, she leaned back in her chair with a genuine smile of accomplishment. "I did that," she said, almost to herself. "I actually figured out how to make the computer do the work for me. How does it feel?" "Like magic. Like I've learned a secret language that makes impossible things possible." Her excitement was infectious. This was the moment I'd been hoping for, when the abstract concepts became practical tools, when the learning process shifted from frustrating to empowering. "Rebecca," I said as we began packing up our materials, "you've made remarkable progress. In just 3 sessions. You're thinking like someone who understands technology, not just someone who's memorizing procedures." "Thank you, and thank you for being patient with my questions. I know I ask a lot of them. Questions are good. They show you're thinking critically about the material rather than just accepting it passively." As we walked toward the library exit, Rebecca seemed different again. More confident, perhaps, but also more relaxed. The tension that had characterized our first meeting was gradually giving way to something that felt more like collaborative problem-solving. "Marcus," she said as we reached the parking garage, "would you be interested in getting coffee sometime? Not for tutoring, just to talk. I feel like our conversations have been helpful in ways that go beyond the technical instruction." The invitation surprised me, though I realized it shouldn't have. Our tutoring sessions had increasingly involved personal discussions about learning, confidence, and career transitions. It made sense that Rebecca might value continuing those conversations in a less formal setting. "I'd like that," I replied. "Though I should mention that I don't know much about the insurance industry. Our conversations might be pretty one-sided." Rebecca laughed. "Actually, I was thinking more about discussing the experience of career transitions and learning new skills as an adult. I have a feeling we have more in common than just our current teacher-student relationship." She was right. Both of us were navigating significant professional changes. Both were learning to be vulnerable in new ways. Both were discovering that competence wasn't a fixed state, but an ongoing process of growth and adaptation. "There's a coffee shop near the university that's usually quiet on weekday mornings," I suggested. "Would next Tuesday work?" "Perfect. I'll text you the details." As I drove home that night, I reflected on how much had changed since that first tentative tutoring session. Rebecca was becoming a confident technology user, but more than that, she was becoming someone who approached challenges with curiosity rather than fear. And somehow, in helping her develop that mindset, I was beginning to rediscover it in myself. The tutoring relationship was evolving into something more complex and meaningful than either of us had anticipated. We were both learning, both growing, both discovering new aspects of ourselves through the process of working together. I looked forward to Tuesday's coffee meeting with genuine anticipation. For the first time in months, I was excited about a conversation that wasn't focused on job applications or technical skills or practical concerns. I was excited about the possibility of connecting with someone who understood the challenges and opportunities that came with starting over as an adult. Rebecca had asked me to teach her something they don't put in books. I was beginning to realize that she was teaching me the same thing: how to find strength in vulnerability, how to view uncertainty as an opportunity rather than a threat, and how meaningful connections could emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. The coffee shop Rebecca had chosen was tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing boutique near the University of Hartford campus. It had the kind of worn wooden tables and mismatched chairs that suggested it catered more to students cramming for exams than business professionals conducting meetings. When I arrived Tuesday morning at 9, Rebecca was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 steaming mugs in front of her. She looked different again, softer somehow. She wore a burgundy cardigan over dark slacks, and her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail rather than her usual severe bun. Without the armor of her business attire, she seemed more approachable, more like someone you might strike up a conversation with in line at the grocery store. "I took the liberty of ordering for you," she said as I approached. "Dark roast, no sugar. I hope that's acceptable." "Perfect. How did you know?" "I pay attention," she smiled. "It's a habit from work, noticing details about people, remembering preferences. It helps in negotiations and client meetings." I settled into the chair across from her, struck by how natural this felt despite being our first interaction outside the library. The coffee was excellent, rich and complex without being bitter. "Thank you for suggesting this," Rebecca said. "I've been looking forward to a conversation that doesn't involve spreadsheet formulas. Though I have to admit, watching you master those formulas Friday night was pretty impressive. You've come further in 3 weeks than most of my students. Due in 3 months." Rebecca's cheeks flushed slightly at the compliment. "I've been practicing obsessively. Robert, my husband, says I'm becoming a hermit. I spend every evening at the kitchen table with my laptop, working through exercises and tutorials." It was the first time she'd mentioned her husband by name, and something in her tone suggested this wasn't entirely a positive development in their household. "How does he feel about your technology crash course?" Rebecca was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee with more attention than the task required. "He thinks I'm overreacting to what he calls a minor workplace adjustment. He keeps saying that my experience and client relationships are more valuable than technical skills, that the company won't really replace me over something like computer proficiency. Do you agree with him? I used to think he might be right. But the more I learn about what's coming, the automation, the data analytics requirements, the cloud-based everything, the more I realize this isn't a minor adjustment. This is a fundamental shift in how business gets done." She looked out the window at the college students hurrying between classes, backpacks slung over shoulders, smartphones in hand. "Robert retired from banking 3 years ago," she continued. "He had a good career, a solid pension, and he left before the industry really started changing. I don't think he understands how different things are now, how quickly you can become obsolete if you don't keep evolving." There was frustration in her voice, but also something that sounded like loneliness. I got the impression that her husband's lack of understanding about her situation was more isolating than supportive. "What about your colleagues? Are they going through similar transitions?" "Some are. David, my boss, is struggling with the same issues, but he's got the advantage of seniority and only a few years until retirement. Most of the younger managers in our department are excited about the changes. They see them as opportunities to advance. And the people at your level? Rebecca's expression darkened slightly. That's complicated. There are 3 regional directors. In our division, Jennifer is 38 and has an MBA with a focus on information systems. She's basically leading the transition committee. Michael is 45, has teenage kids who've been teaching him technology since middle school, and he's always been more naturally comfortable with computers than I am. That leaves you feeling isolated. It leaves me feeling expendable, she said bluntly. When the transition is complete, the company will need directors who can maximize the new system's capabilities. If I can't demonstrate that level of proficiency, ... She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Rebecca wasn't just learning technology skills for professional development. She was learning them for professional survival. What would you do if the worst-case scenario happened? If despite all your preparation, the company decided to restructure your position? It was a heavy question, but Rebecca had been circling around this fear in every conversation we'd had. Sometimes confronting the worst-case scenario directly could be liberating. I honestly don't know, she admitted. I've been with Hartford Insurance my entire career. I know the industry, but most of my contacts are internal. My network is deep but narrow, if that makes sense. Have you considered looking at other companies? Using this technological training as a way to market yourself to organizations that might value both your experience and your newly developed skills. Rebecca looked surprised, as if this possibility hadn't occurred to her. You think other companies would be interested in someone my age who's just learning these technologies? I think they'd be interested in someone with 18 years of industry experience who's demonstrated the initiative and adaptability to master new skills. That combination of experience and growth mindset is actually pretty rare. She considered this, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. I've been so focused on keeping my current job that I haven't really thought about other opportunities. Maybe that's been limiting my perspective. What would you want in an ideal position? If you could design your perfect professional situation. That's a question I haven't asked myself in years, Rebecca said with a laugh. I've been so focused on meeting other people's expectations, the company's, Robert's, even my own from 10 years ago. I'm not sure I remember what I actually want. Think about it now. What energizes you about your work? Rebecca was quiet for several minutes, genuinely considering the question. Outside, the morning rush was beginning to wind down. The coffee shop was filling with the kind of people who could have extended conversations on a Tuesday morning. Freelancers, graduate students, retirees. I like solving complex problems, she said finally. I like taking a situation that seems impossible, like a client with multiple claims and conflicting policy interpretations, and finding a solution that works for everyone. I like mentoring younger employees, helping them understand not just the technical aspects of insurance, but the human elements, how to read clients, how to navigate office politics, how to build trust. Her voice grew more animated as she talked, and I could see glimpses of the professional confidence that had carried her through 18 years in a competitive industry. I also like the moment when everything clicks for a client, she continued. When they finally understand their coverage, or when we resolve a claim they thought was hopeless. There's something deeply satisfying about turning confusion into clarity. Those are all skills that would translate well to other environments. You think so? Absolutely. Problem solving, mentoring, communication, building trust. Those are exactly the kind of human skills that become more valuable as technology automates routine tasks. Rebecca smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked genuinely optimistic about her professional future. You know, she said, my daughter said something similar last weekend. She said that in her computer science program, the most successful students aren't necessarily the ones who code fastest or know the most programming languages. They're the ones who can understand what clients actually need and translate technical solutions into business benefits. Smart daughter, she is. Sometimes I think she inherited more of my professional instincts than I realized. She's interning at a tech startup this semester, and the stories she tells about workplace dynamics could come straight from my office. Have you told her about your concerns regarding the transition at work? Rebecca shook her head. I don't want to worry her. She's got enough stress with school and internship responsibilities. Besides, I'm her mother. I'm supposed to be the one with answers, not the one asking for guidance. What if she'd actually welcome the chance to help? What if sharing your challenges would make her feel valued and trusted rather than burdened? It was a gentle challenge to Rebecca's assumptions about parent-child relationships, but I could see her considering it seriously. Maybe, she said. Sarah has offered to help with my technology learning several times. I've always declined because I didn't want to impose on her time, or because accepting help from your daughter feels like admitting weakness. Rebecca looked at me sharply, then laughed. You're getting pretty good at reading between the lines. It's not that difficult. You've mentioned feeling like you always need to be the expert, the one with answers. That must be exhausting. It is, she admitted. Especially now, when I feel like I'm learning something new every day and questioning assumptions I've held for years. What would happen if you gave yourself permission to not have all the answers? I ask myself that question a lot lately. The honest answer is that I don't know. I've been the competent one, the reliable one, the person others come to for solutions for so long that I'm not sure who I am without that identity. It was a profound admission, the kind that revealed someone in the midst of a fundamental life transition rather than just a career adjustment. Maybe this technology learning isn't just about keeping your job, I suggested. Maybe it's about discovering who you are when you're not defined by always being right. Rebecca stared at me for a long moment. That's either very insightful or terrifying, possibly both. Learning usually is, she laughed. You keep saying that. It's becoming a theme in our conversations. Because it keeps being true, growth requires discomfort. The question is whether you trust yourself enough to stay in the discomfort long enough to reach the other side. Do you? Trust yourself, I mean, it was my turn to consider a difficult question. 6 months ago, I would have answered with confident certainty. Now, after job loss and career uncertainty and the humbling experience of starting over, I wasn't sure. I'm learning to, I said finally. This tutoring work has been part of that process. Helping other people navigate their own learning curves has reminded me that competence isn't a fixed state. It's an ongoing process of adaptation and growth. Is that what drew you to teaching? The opportunity to help others through transitions you've experienced yourself? Partly. But also the realization that teaching requires you to understand material deeply enough to explain it clearly. Working with students like you has made me a better learner myself. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. Some of my best professional development has come from mentoring new employees. Having to articulate why I make certain decisions has forced me to examine my own assumptions and approaches. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the ebb and flow of coffee shop life around us. Students claimed tables for study sessions. Business people conducted informal meetings. Elderly couples shared newspapers and quiet conversation. Marcus, Rebecca said finally, can I ask you something personal? Of course. What do you want? Not professionally, personally. What kind of life are you trying to build? It was an unexpectedly intimate question, one that went far beyond our tutoring relationship or even our developing friendship. I used to think I knew, I said. Stable career, financial security, maybe eventually a family. Standard middle class. Aspirations. But the last 6 months have made me question whether those goals were actually mine or just what I thought I was supposed to want. And now? Now I think I want work that feels meaningful, relationships that are honest and supportive, and the confidence to handle uncertainty without falling apart. Beyond that, I'm still figuring it out, Rebecca smiled. Those sound like much better goals than the ones you started with. What about you? What do you want? I want to stop being afraid, she said immediately, as if she'd been waiting for someone to ask. I want to wake up excited about challenges instead of dreading them. I want to have conversations with my husband where I don't feel like he's humoring me. I want my daughter to see me as someone who's still growing and learning rather than someone who's just trying not to fall behind. Those are beautiful goals. They're also terrifying because they require me to change in ways I'm not sure I'm capable of. What if you're more capable than you think? Rebecca looked at me with something that might have been hope. You really believe that? I've watched you master complex technical skills in 3 weeks, overcome a lifelong fear of making mistakes, and approach problems with increasing confidence. If you can do all that, I think you can handle pretty much anything. Thank you, she said softly. I needed to hear that today. We finished our coffee and prepared to leave, but neither of us seemed eager to end the conversation. There was something nourishing about talking to someone who understood the challenges of adult learning and career transition, someone who didn't judge uncertainty as weakness. Same time next week? Rebecca asked as we stood to go. For coffee or tutoring? Both, if you're willing. I feel like these conversations are as valuable as the technical instruction. I'd like that too. As we parted ways in the parking lot, I realized our relationship had shifted again. We were no longer just teacher and student, or even just friendly acquaintances. We were becoming something more complex, 2 people helping each other navigate significant life transitions, offering each other the kind of support that comes from shared understanding and mutual respect. Drove home feeling energized in a way I hadn't experienced since before my job loss. There was something powerful about being needed not just for technical knowledge but for perspective and encouragement. Rebecca was learning technology skills, but I was learning something equally valuable: how to find meaning and connection in unexpected places, how to build relationships based on authenticity rather than just professional necessity. The tutoring sessions would continue, but they were becoming a smaller part of a larger relationship that neither of us had anticipated, but both of us clearly valued. We were teaching each other things that definitely weren't in any books. 3 weeks after our first coffee meeting, Rebecca walked into the library carrying herself differently. There was a confidence in her stride that hadn't been there before, and when she sat down at our table, she immediately pulled out a folder thick with printed documents. I have news, she announced, her eyes bright with excitement. David called me into his office yesterday. The company is implementing a pilot program for the new analytics platform, and he wants me to lead the regional rollout. I felt a surge of pride for her accomplishment. Rebecca, that's incredible. They wouldn't have chosen you if they didn't believe in your capabilities. That's what I keep telling myself, she said, though I detected a note of anxiety beneath her excitement. But Marcus, the timeline is aggressive. I have 6 weeks to master the entire platform and then train 12 regional managers across Connecticut and Massachusetts. 6 weeks. She spread the documents across the table: technical specifications, training manuals, implementation schedules. The scope was enormous, far beyond anything we'd tackled in our sessions. What does mastery look like in their eyes? I asked, scanning through the materials. I need to be able to demonstrate every major function of the system, troubleshoot common problems, and create custom reports for different departmental needs. Essentially, I need to become the in-house expert. The weight of responsibility was evident in her voice. This wasn't just another learning opportunity, it was the make or break moment she'd been unconsciously preparing for since our first session. How do you feel about the challenge? Rebecca was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts. Terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. This is exactly the kind of opportunity I was hoping the technology training would create. But now that it's here, the reality feels overwhelming. What specific areas concern you most? The presentation component, she said immediately. I'll need to conduct live demonstrations for groups of managers, some of whom have been skeptical about the new systems. If I stumble during those presentations, if I can't answer their questions confidently, it won't just reflect poorly on me. It could undermine the entire rollout. I understood her concern. Technical competency was one thing, but being able to teach and inspire confidence in others required a different level of mastery. What support is the company providing? There's a 3-day intensive training session at corporate headquarters next week. After that, I'm essentially on my own. Until the pilot launch. She looked up from the documents. Marcus, I know this goes beyond our normal tutoring arrangement, but would you be willing to help me prepare for the presentation aspects? I'll pay additional fees, of course. Money isn't the issue, I said. But I want to make sure I can actually help you in the way you need. This is pretty specialized material. I've been thinking about that. What I need isn't just technical knowledge. I need someone to help me practice explaining complex concepts clearly. Someone who can identify when I'm losing my audience or getting too deep into technical details. It was a smart request. Rebecca understood that successful technology implementation was as much about communication and change management as it was about technical proficiency. I'd be happy to help, I said. But I think we should also bring in your daughter Sarah. If she's willing, her perspective could be invaluable for making sure your explanations work for people with different levels of technical background. Rebecca's face lit up. You think she'd be interested? From what you've told me about her, she seems like someone who'd enjoy the challenge. And it might be meaningful for both of you to work together on something this important. I'll call her tonight, Rebecca decided. The worst she can say is that she's too busy with school. We spent the rest of that session going through the technical documentation, identifying the core concepts Rebecca would need to master and the potential trouble spots where users might struggle. The material was complex, but I could see she'd already internalized many of the fundamental principles through our previous work. You know, I said as we prepared to leave, 6 months ago, would you have believed you could handle an assignment like this? Rebecca paused in gathering her papers. 6 months ago, I would have assumed they'd give this kind of project to Jennifer or Michael. The fact that David chose me, ... She shook her head in wonder. I keep waiting for him to change his mind. What if instead of waiting for him to change his mind, you focused on proving he made the right choice? That's what I'm trying to do. But Marcus, what if I fail? What if despite all this preparation, I can't pull it off? It was the fear that had been lurking beneath all our conversations, the possibility that effort and good intentions might not be enough. Then you'll have failed while attempting something significant rather than succeeding at playing it safe. I said, and you'll know more about your own capabilities than you did before, Rebecca smiled. That's either very wise or completely reckless. Why can't it be both? 2 days later, my phone rang at 8 in the evening. Rebecca's name appeared on the screen, and when I answered, her voice was breathless with excitement. Marcus, you're never going to believe what just happened. Sarah not only agreed to help with the presentation prep, she arranged for me to practice with her entire study group. 6 computer science majors who've agreed to play the role of skeptical insurance managers. That's fantastic. How are you feeling about it? Nervous, but good nervous. For the first time, this feels like something I might actually be able to accomplish rather than just survive. The confidence in her voice was remarkable. This was a woman who'd walked into the library 2 months ago, apologizing for not understanding basic computer functions. Now she was preparing to lead a major corporate technology initiative. There's something else, Rebecca continued. Sarah and I had a long conversation about the project, and she helped me realize something important. I've been approaching this like I need to become a technology expert overnight. But what the company actually needs is someone who can bridge the gap between the technical capabilities and the business applications. That's a crucial insight. Sarah pointed out that my 18 years of insurance experience gives me something the IT trainers don't have. I understand the daily challenges the regional managers face, the kinds of reports they need, the client scenarios that create complications. I don't need to be the best technologist in the room. I need to be the best translator. It was a perfect reframing that played to Rebecca's existing strengths while acknowledging the new skills she'd developed. How did it feel having that conversation with Sarah? Liberating, Rebecca said immediately, and humbling. She asked me questions about the business side that I could answer easily, and I realized I'd been so focused on what I don't know that I've been discounting what I do know. And how did Sarah respond to being included in your professional challenge? She was honored. She said it made her feel like I trusted her judgment and valued her expertise. I had no idea she'd been waiting for me to ask for her help. There was emotion in Rebecca's voice that suggested this conversation with her daughter had been about more than just work preparation. It sounds like this project is changing more than just your technical skills. It's changing everything, Rebecca admitted. My relationship with Sarah, my confidence at work, even my conversations with Robert. Last night, for the first time in months, I was excited to tell him about my day instead of dreading his questions about how things were going. How did he respond? Better than expected. He's still not entirely convinced this technological shift is as significant as I think it is, but he can see that the opportunity is real and that I'm approaching it strategically rather than just panicking. I could hear the relief in her voice. Having her husband's support, even if it wasn't complete understanding, clearly meant a great deal to her. Rebecca, can I ask you something? Of course. What's the most important thing you've learned through this whole experience? Not just the technology skills, but everything that's come with it. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear the sounds of her evening routine in the background. Dishes being put away, a television murmuring softly. I think I've learned that competence isn't about never feeling uncertain, she said finally. It's about being willing to feel uncertain, in service of growth. For most of my career, I avoided situations where I might not immediately excel. But this project has taught me that those are exactly the situations where the most meaningful learning happens. That's a profound shift. It is. And it's scary, because it means I can't use the excuse of not knowing something as a reason to avoid trying. If I can learn complex data analytics at 52, what other challenges have I been avoiding unnecessarily? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications about career choices, personal relationships, and life. Decisions that extended far beyond technology training. What kinds of challenges are you thinking about? Starting with smaller things, Rebecca said. I've always wanted to learn Spanish. Sarah's been encouraging me for years, but I kept saying I was too old to pick up a new language. I've thought about taking art classes, maybe watercolor painting, but I convinced myself I didn't have artistic talent. And the bigger things? That's where it gets complicated. Robert and I have been in a comfortable routine for 20 years. We don't fight, but we don't really challenge each other either. I'm starting to wonder if comfort has been masquerading as compatibility. It was a deeply personal admission, one that suggested the changes in Rebecca's professional life were catalyzing questions about her personal life as well. Are you planning to have that conversation with him? I don't know yet. Part of me thinks I should wait until after this work project is finished, until I know whether the professional changes are going to stick. But another part of me thinks that waiting might just be another form of avoiding uncertainty. What does your instinct tell you? 30 years from now, I don't want to look back and realize I spent the second half of my life playing it safe, because the first half worked out reasonably well. The clarity in her statement was striking. Rebecca had moved far beyond simply learning computer skills. She was fundamentally reassessing her relationship with risk, growth, and authenticity. That sounds like wisdom rather than recklessness. I hope so. But it's hard to tell the difference sometimes. We talked for another 20 minutes, covering the logistics of her upcoming corporate training and the presentation practice sessions she'd arranged with Sarah's study group. But underneath the practical details, I could sense a deeper transformation taking place. Rebecca was becoming someone who sought challenges rather than avoiding them, someone who valued growth over comfort, someone who was willing to be vulnerable. In service of authenticity, the woman who'd walked into the library 2 months ago, terrified of making mistakes and desperate to maintain an image of competence, was evolving into someone who embraced uncertainty as a pathway to discovery. "Marcus," she said as we prepared to end the call, "I want you to know how much these conversations have meant to me. Not just the tutoring sessions, but all of it. You've helped me remember that learning isn't something that stops when you reach a certain age or achieve a certain level of success. You've taught me some things too," I replied. "About courage, about the importance of staying curious, about how meaningful it can be to help someone else discover their own capabilities. Maybe that's what good teaching really is. Two people helping each other learn things they didn't know they needed to understand." After we hung up, I sat in my small apartment thinking about the conversation. Rebecca was preparing for the biggest professional challenge of her career. But more than that, she was preparing for a fundamental shift in how she approached life itself. I realized that somewhere in the process of helping her navigate her technological transformation, I'd begun my own parallel journey. Working with Rebecca had reminded me that competence wasn't about having all the answers. It was about being willing to engage with questions that mattered, even when the outcomes were uncertain. The tutoring relationship that had started as a simple exchange of technical knowledge for modest payment had become something much more significant. We were helping each other discover new versions of ourselves, versions that were braver, more curious, and more willing to embrace the beautiful uncertainty of continued growth. In 6 weeks, Rebecca would either succeed brilliantly at her corporate presentation or learn valuable lessons from a spectacular failure. Either way, she would know that she'd been willing to risk everything for the possibility of becoming more than she'd ever imagined she could be. And somehow, in helping her reach that point, I discovered the same willingness in myself. The presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a crisp October afternoon in Hartford Insurance's main conference room. I arrived early, not as Rebecca's tutor, but as someone she'd specifically invited to witness what she called the culmination of everything we'd worked toward together. Rebecca stood at the front of the room, adjusting her laptop connection to the large monitor. She wore a navy blazer with a confidence I'd never seen before, not the rigid professionalism of our first meeting, but something warmer and more authentic. When she spotted me entering, she smiled genuinely. "You came," she said, walking over during the final setup minutes. "Wouldn't miss it. How are you feeling?" "Ready," she replied without hesitation. "Actually ready, not just pretending to be." The room was filled with 12 regional managers, David, her boss, and 2 executives from corporate headquarters. Rebecca had described some of these people as skeptics, others as allies, but looking at them now, they simply seemed like professionals curious about changes affecting their daily work. "Good afternoon, everyone," Rebecca began, her voice clear and steady. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be standing here demonstrating advanced data analytics software, I would have suggested they reconsider their assessment of my capabilities. A few chuckles rippled through the room. Rebecca's opening was personal but professional, vulnerable yet confident. "Today, I want to show you not just what this system can do, but how it will transform the way we serve our clients and support each other." For the next 45 minutes, Rebecca delivered a masterful presentation. She demonstrated complex functions with ease, answered technical questions with clarity, and consistently connected software capabilities to real business scenarios her audience faced daily. When one manager asked about handling difficult client data migrations, Rebecca didn't just explain the process. She showed them 3 different approaches and explained when to use each one. But what struck me most wasn't her technical competency. It was how she'd learned to teach. Rebecca had discovered that effective instruction required understanding not just the material, but the people receiving it. She anticipated confusion, acknowledged when concepts were challenging, and celebrated small victories as managers successfully completed practice exercises. "The most important thing to remember," she said during the Q&A session, "is that mastering this system isn't about becoming a technology expert overnight. It's about being willing to experiment, make mistakes, and learn from what doesn't work." After the presentation, as people filed out discussing implementation timelines and training schedules, David approached Rebecca with undisguised pride. "Outstanding work, Rebecca." Corporate was extremely impressed. "They're recommending we expand the pilot program statewide, with you leading the broader rollout." I watched Rebecca process this news, not with surprise, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd achieved exactly what they'd worked toward. Later, as we walked through the parking garage, Rebecca was unusually quiet. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Better than okay," she said. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to point out that I'm not really qualified for this level of responsibility. But Marcus, for the first time in months, I feel like I belong exactly where I am. You've earned that feeling, have I? Or have I just learned to fake confidence convincingly?" It was a profound question, one that got to the heart of imposter syndrome and authentic competence. "What do you think the difference is?" Rebecca considered this as we reached our cars. "I think fake confidence is about convincing others you know something you don't. Real confidence is about trusting yourself to figure out what you don't know yet." "And which category are you in now?" "Definitely the second. I know I'll encounter challenges I haven't prepared for, situations where the system behaves unexpectedly, or clients have needs I haven't anticipated. But I'm not afraid of that anymore. I know I can learn whatever I need to learn." 6 months later, I received a text from Rebecca. "Coffee tomorrow? I have news." We met at our familiar spot near the university. Rebecca looked radiant, wearing jeans and a green sweater that brought out her eyes. There was an ease about her that hadn't been there even during her successful presentation. "I got the promotion," she announced as I sat down. "Regional Technology Director for the entire Northeast Division." "But Marcus, that's not even the biggest news." "What else?" "Robert and I are separating, not angrily, not dramatically. We just finally admitted that we'd grown into different people who want different things. He wants retirement and golf and predictable routines. I want challenges and growth and the chance to discover what else I'm capable of." I felt a complex mix of emotions, happiness for her professional success, but concern about the personal upheaval. "How are you handling the separation?" "Better than I expected." We had an honest conversation about the fact that we'd been coasting on habit rather than genuine connection for years. It was sad, but also relieving. Like finally acknowledging something we'd both known but been afraid to say. "And Sarah?" "Supportive." She said she'd been wondering when we'd figure out what she'd observed years ago, that we'd become roommates rather than partners. Rebecca reached across the table and took my hand. "Marcus, there's something else I need to tell you. Something I should have said months ago." My heart rate accelerated, sensing the weight of whatever she was about to share. "I didn't just ask you to teach me technology. I asked you to teach me something they don't put in books. How to be brave enough to become who I really am instead of who I thought I was supposed to be." The confession hung between us, transforming every interaction we'd had into something deeper and more intentional than I'd realized. "And what did you discover?" "That courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and showing up anyway." You taught me that by example, Marcus. Every time you admitted you didn't know something, every time you shared your own struggles, every time you encouraged me to risk failure in service of growth. Rebecca. I'm not asking for anything, she said gently. I'm just grateful. You helped me remember that life is supposed to be about becoming, not just being. As we parted ways that afternoon, I realized that Rebecca had taught me the same lesson. Our tutoring relationship had evolved into something that changed both of us fundamentally, not through grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but through the patient, courageous work of showing up authentically, day after day, willing to learn whatever life was trying to teach us. Sometimes the most important education happens in the spaces between official lessons, in the conversations that begin with technical questions, but end with discoveries about who we really are and who we're brave enough to become. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.